My GF, 23, cheated, knowing that I suffered from females before and shared my 27 very confidential information. Names have been changed for confidentiality. I apologize for any grammatical errors in advance. English is not my native language. Before I share the story of infidelity, I must clarify what I meant by suffered from females. My mother attempted to kill me twice, repeatedly struck me with an electric cord, leaving numerous scars on my back, and emotionally abused me for several years. I have yet to fully recover from this. My older sister groomed, molested, and raped me for 4 years, from ages 7 to 11. She ceased when I confided in a classmate, but she did not face any consequences. Additionally, my grandmother, with whom I lived for 12 years, 6 of which were solely with her, took care of me while I finished school and college, as my mother and sister moved to a larger city for work. During that time, I rarely spoke to my mother, not that I wished to. At 16, my grandmother informed me that we needed to move to a rented apartment due to her loan contract being converted into a sale to someone who ensnared her in a scam. Despite her being an experienced accountant in the past, she did not request her copy of the contract. Consequently, we lost our home, and this grandmother is still in a difficult situation even after 11 years. What about my father? He committed suicide when I was 8. So I suppose that's quite enough for a single person. Some of my friends were surprised that I still find women attractive. This is because, despite everything, I had a few good female friends and several female teachers whom I admired. One of those girls even blatantly asked me out, but with my self-esteem being low at that time, I foolishly thought, "Good joke, Mark," and missed the opportunity. Plenty of others showed interest in me, but I did not dwell on it much. Now, onto the affair. This girl was not my first partner. I ended things with my actual first after about 1.5 months due to a significant number of red flags. This one, Ruby, was my second partner. She had her share of red flags too, though to a lesser extent. As it turns out, they were not too far apart. She was aware of everything I mentioned earlier in the post. She was the first person I confided in about my experiences. We dated for a little over a year and moved in together when she met Chris. Yes, I know him. In fact, we share the same name. Chris, like Ruby, was in her college and had a fascination with minks. Ruby had one in the past that tragically passed away and was permanently commemorated on her shoulder. Chris had 3 minks, alive but not for long, due to the neglect of his girlfriend at the time and some poisoning. They quickly became friends, especially since Ruby was a social butterfly. We met Chris in person and discovered our mutual interest in shooting. He even suggested a good shooting range where I could practice my archery. However, that was our only interaction. One day, while standing at a bus stop, I tried to hug Ruby to express my affection and provide her with something stable to hold on to, but she dodged it, took her friend, and occupied seats nearby. When we returned home, I asked her about that, and she explained that it was due to her slight panic from a car accident in her childhood. She had mentioned it even before we moved in together, so I believed her, but still felt uneasy. Later, I found out that he was giving her gifts. I was fine with Ruby having male friends. I knew almost all of them. At first, the gifts were simple treats, but then they were related to her other obsession, Genshin. I remarked that he had a talent for selecting gifts. However, while we were lounging on the couch, I caught a glimpse of a particular message from Chris, "Can I lay down next to you?" This made me very uncomfortable. She knew I was not okay with her occasional flirting with her friends, which she did with both genders, and her failure to make it clear that she was in a relationship with me when someone flirted with her. I told her that Chris's behavior was unacceptable. She agreed and promised to distance herself from him and reduce their interactions. I felt somewhat relieved, but my instincts were still tingling a bit. Everything seemed fine for a couple of months, until she inadvertently admitted that she had been interacting with Chris again. I pretended not to hear her confession at first, but later I snooped on her phone. It turned out she had been studying with him for almost a month, and after our recent argument, she asked if she could go over to play with his minks. I confronted her about these study sessions without mentioning the texts I had seen. She claimed she didn't want me to be upset and explained that Chris was a year ahead of her, which was true, and excelled in a subject she struggled with. The latter was true. I was unsure about the former. She added that he needed emotional support due to his abusive girlfriend. I felt extremely uncomfortable. She apologized and promised to improve. Later, I came home early due to health issues, and she unexpectedly entered, surprised to find me there. I told her I was feeling unwell. She expressed a desire to go for a walk with Chris. I begrudgingly agreed but asked her to return when the rain began. She complied and left. Late October weather meant it wasn't long before it started raining. However, she did not return. Not even when it turned into a downpour. She was gone for a full 2 hours, and I was furious. When she finally returned, I confronted her about her absence. She became extremely defensive. I issued an ultimatum: it was either him or me. She chose me but went to her parents' house to cool off. She wasn't lying about that. She stayed there for a week before I called her for a serious discussion. We met, and our conversation boiled down to my lack of trust in her and her need for honesty, the first step of which was granting me full access to her social media accounts. She accepted immediately, although later I refrained from looking, suspecting she had deleted any compromising material. Then, I made a post in the aita subreddit, where everyone stated that I was wrong for not leaving her. I felt the same, and this was a confirmation of my thoughts. Ruby became exceptionally needy and affectionate after that conversation, but I felt repulsed by her. Shortly after, I disclosed everything, stating that we could not continue like this and needed to break up. She cried and pleaded for me to reconsider, but I realized it was pointless. She requested her brother's help to move out, so our final awkward interactions spanned only a couple of days. I also packed up her gifts because I wanted to move on as soon as possible. Her brother later called to tell me they got home safely, but Ruby had been crying the entire time. She attempted to call me several times, but I let them go to voicemail. Sometime later, she asked to meet so she could be entirely honest with me. For closure. However, I no longer needed that. Chris drunkenly confessed to a mutual friend that Ruby had performed a sexual act on him to help him cope with his abusive girlfriend, while knowing that Ruby was my girlfriend at the time. I didn't want to inflict any more pain on myself. I wanted to confront her and hurl insults, but I believed silence would speak volumes. Later, after a Dungeons & Dragons session, Ariana, her best friend, pointed out that my character had elements of my personality. I asked her to elaborate, and she mentioned the character's traumas, connecting them to my story. She was referring to my sister. I inquired about where she learned this and how much she knew. It turned out Ruby had shared my struggles with her, bit by bit. Ariana felt guilty afterward and requested that I not tell anyone, especially me. But since she was aware of my breakup with Ruby, she assumed I wouldn't mind her comment. I was angry and disgusted, so I instructed her to inform Ruby that she no longer existed to me. This arrangement led Ariana to provide her support during this challenging time. She had been emotionally supporting me since our breakup without knowing the full reason behind it until that moment. Months passed, and I gave up on searching for a girlfriend, opting instead to take multiple STD tests. I was clear and concentrated on my passions. One day, while attending a Hema club, I met an interesting individual. Let's call her Jess. Jess is a Hema enthusiast who loves The Lord of the Rings and Pathfinder. I thought we could connect due to my experience as a tabletop role-playing game player and my fondness for Pathfinder after playing owl-cat games. She would likely appreciate my Aragorn Strider cosplay. However, this fiery redhead had different ideas. The coaches remarked that I was a natural with blades, particularly Montante and Saber, and Jess declared that I would be her rival. We were both newcomers, but Jess had arrived a month before me. She was frustrated that she couldn't defeat me in duels due to my height advantage, albeit minor, around 9-10 centimeters, and also in Dead by Daylight. She despised both my jump scare as Michael Myers and Pyramid Head. Yes, she was that one knee main. She seemed to dislike me as a person, but then I began noticing cheeky grins among the other club members. One day, our club went out for drinks to celebrate our founder's birthday at his house. We may have had a bit, or more, too much to drink, especially since Jess challenged me to a drinking contest, like a true dwarf. She even tried to imitate their accent. I accepted, and after 1 or 2 bottles of rum, we began wrestling, as reported by club members. I pinned her down and we stared at each other for a moment before starting to kiss, if this mutual face devouring could be called a kiss. They encouraged us to go upstairs to continue, so we did. When we woke up, Both of us were tired, exhausted, disheveled, and in dire need of water. Thanks to our fellow club members, we had a few bottles nearby. Then we both realized we were naked, and our clothes were scattered everywhere. Even my underwear somehow made it onto the window curtain. We agreed not to discuss it but began talking more and bonding. We even decided to create cosplays of our Pathfinder characters. A week ago, Jess admitted that she liked me, but I still hadn't recovered from Ruby. She understood, and we decided to take things slowly. Our rivalry endured, but it transitioned into a more love-hate relationship. Interestingly, club members were placing bets on whether we would begin dating or not or hook up. Theo, one of the bettors, even took me out for drinks yesterday to share his prize money and celebrate us. I'm unclear about what he meant by that, but we had a fantastic time. As for Ruby and Chris, they attempted to date shortly after my breakup with her. However, she couldn't bear his deteriorating alcoholism and the bills for treating his last surviving mink, so she ended things with him soon after. That's all I know about her, and I would like to keep it that way. Story 2. The time one person's over-the-top sense of what is acceptable or not in the workplace changed company IT policy forever. Note edited one time in total to correct for a few minor spelling and grammar errors, yet another account from my volunteer position. This is the tale of how one individual's extreme perception of what is acceptable in the workplace caused a company-wide shift in information technology policy. The background: I have been engaged in customer service and technical support work on a volunteer basis for more than 10 years, and occasionally, prior to the pandemic, we would offer tours of our call center to schools and other interested groups. This story revolves around one such tour group. Before we delve into the details, you, the reader, would likely benefit from some knowledge of our policy regarding employee desktop wallpapers, as it becomes pertinent later. Before this incident, the policy was quite straightforward as long as the image is not deemed offensive by a reasonable person. Employees were free to express themselves with any background image they preferred. The more detailed version of what this policy stated is employees are free to express themselves through their desktop backgrounds, provided the image would not, according to a reasonable person, be considered offensive, shocking, or distasteful. Examples of acceptable types of images include, but are not limited to, cars, beach or other scenery, family, pets, school logos, etc. Strictly forbidden images include, but are not limited to, political or religious messages, photos where the subject, S, are not fully clothed, no underwear, swimsuits, topless, or bikini shots apply equally to all genders and identities, images depicting acts of violence, etc. Images that should be used with discretion are pictures of individuals other than oneself, pictures of minor children who are not one's own or for whom one is responsible, or pictures of houses, either one's own or that of another. As you can see, it's pretty standard practice for a casual office environment, but apparently not squeaky clean enough for one individual. The incident: we had a high school tour group visiting one day, and everything was going smoothly until shortly before the end of the tour. One of the chaperones accompanying the group happened to notice a colleague's desktop displaying a photo of him fully dressed, white t-shirt, jeans, and shoes, working on his car, which was on blocks. According to this woman, a person working on their vehicle was so offensive that it warranted a complaint to the chief executive officer. We will refer to her as K for this narrative, several hours after she and her group departed. She called K in a fit of rage, expressing that, "You shouldn't allow your employees to have that type of filth on their screens where anyone can just walk by and see it," and similar comments. After many clarifying questions, as the woman was not being very specific about what kind of filth she was referring to or whose screen the alleged filth was displayed on, Kay was able to locate the colleague in question and ask him to show her the background he had at that moment. After reviewing it, Kay replied to the individual in no uncertain terms. After examining the image in question, it does meet the company guidelines for acceptable background images. This individual still disagreed, so after consulting with all the department heads, employees from various departments, several IT personnel, etc., and the entire group unanimously found nothing offensive about the wallpaper in question, Kay issued an order for the Information Technology Department to develop a standard background that all employees can agree upon, along with appropriate procedures and forms to allow for medical exceptions to the rule. Once the image, forms, and procedures are prepared, the standard wallpaper should be deployed to all employee workstations connected to the domain via Microsoft Group Policy, and such group policy should not permit the end user to alter the wallpaper in any manner. The resulting group policy should follow the employee regardless of where he/she/they log on. Additionally, any employee with a signed doctor's note indicating a need for an exemption to the wallpaper should be placed in a separate organizational unit that is exempt from the desktop wallpaper policy. Such a doctor's note only needs to state, "I, doctor's name, am treating employee and am aware of their current medical status, and they must be permitted to change their desktop wallpaper." This doctor's note does not need to specify the exact medical condition, necessitating the wallpaper change request. Lastly, employee-owned devices should be added to the domain, and employees will be required to use their corporate login on personal devices while on the premises. Among the options, the logo for a company-wide favorite show, the Italian animated series, Winx Club, was selected. Initially, it was mandated to be the 1024x768 Winx Club logo with a transparent background, behind which the employee could choose any color, but that did not go over well, as some individuals lack an understanding of clashing colors. Therefore, I was requested by the head of the IT department to create a Photoshop file featuring the logo on a solid white background, with the words, Winx Corporate Desktop 2.3, in black text in the upper left and lower right corners of the image. I accomplished this, and it was implemented. However, too many employees complained that the solid white was too harsh for their eyes, and I was once more asked to modify it to a solid black background with white text, updating the text to Winx Corporate Desktop 2.3 X, thus establishing the mandatory corporate desktop wallpaper. No one has since then, internally or externally, raised any objections to it. This isn't my or any of my colleagues' first encounter with a mandatory corporate desktop wallpaper, as most of us attended schools where, to prevent students from displaying inappropriate images on their desktops, all student workstations were set to some variation of either the school colors or the school logo. Most, if not all, of the mandatory school or company wallpapers, such as AT&T, I personally admired and wish I could have for rotation on my laptop or cell phone. I've had a few of the school ones, but those have since been lost to time, several hard drives and flash drives ago, unfortunately. One might wonder, if the image wasn't offensive and adhered to the guidelines, why didn't Kay simply tell the upset person to go away? The answer to that is simple. Kay did not want to spend hours on the phone or via email defending each employee's choices in desktop wallpaper, even if it clearly fell within the guidelines. So rather than defend a moving target, she figured it would be simpler for everyone if we just created a standard. That way, if anyone complained, it could easily be explained away as, "That's just the logo of a software tool we use," which is partially true since our intranet portal is named Winx Portal Social Intranet Platform, which is essentially a rebranded V-bulletin featuring the Winx Club logo in the upper right corner. Both Kay and I are acutely aware that someone might take issue with Winx Club for various reasons, but since the show was aimed at children and pre-teens, with a US TV rating of TVY7 at most, its content would generally be viewed as not offensive, and anyone who has problems with the themes of teamwork, friendship, acceptance, and self-discovery, we truly do not know how to respond. The aftermath. Since the corporate desktop has been introduced, no complaints have been lodged, and several people have requested a copy of the background for their personal computers at home. Consequently, Kay, along with IT, has granted me permission to release the final PNGs and the PSDs because 1. The Winx Club logo is accessible online, as it is a cartoon that aired on television in the early 2000s, making it easy for anyone to recreate the corporate desktop look. 2. The modifications we made to it are so simple that anyone with basic Photoshop skills can replicate it at home and achieve the same result. And 3. We take pride in our company-wide appreciation of this show. Therefore, if you really search for it, You can locate the original file or the PSDs to make it your own. If possible, I will link it below for you to download. Here's a link to the final image, https drive google.com file d1rcl 0zck3 yqcf rkg ridti 5 mzjflz 0 inj view usp equals sharing. https drive google.com file d1rcl 0zck3 yqcf rkg ridti 5 mzjflz 0 inj view usp equals sharing. Here's a link to the folder kint. Additionally, there are a few bonuses in the folder, including an alternate version featuring a gold Winx Club logo and 2 different versions featuring an American flag for our celebration of Independence Day. As we are US-based, https drive google.com drive folders 19G VKQRWC AWX 025 TQWOIs QQH2 YUGG3 USP equals sharing 8. Regarding the medical exception policy, I previously asked IT, prior to writing this account, if anyone has ever utilized the medical exception, and according to the department head, no one has taken advantage of it during her tenure. Some of the more senior members of that department claim to have seen it used only once, and the individual who required it never abused it, considering it is such a loophole that you could drive a tank through it. I hope someone found a smile in this account of one person being overzealous and our company's response using group policy. Story 3. AIX and Pains follow up to yet another IBM upgrade, parts 1 and 2. This is a follow-up to yet another IBM upgrade, which was recounted in 2 segments. Part 1, https www.reddit.com, r Tales from Tech Support, comments 186 Jill. Yet another IBM upgrade, part 1 UTM source equals share and UTM medium equals web 2x and context equals 3. Part 2 https www.reddit.com, r Tales from Tech Support, comments 1. In parts 1 and 2, I shared the narrative about the challenges we encountered while installing Unix on an AIX platform. Once we successfully installed the operating system, I was able to transfer our software to it without any issues. This is what transpired when I deployed our software on the designated machine. We were responding to a request for proposal for a significant government contract for an institution that sounds like Pi-R-Us, if you hold it out at arm's length and squint with one eye. The plan was for me to fly out to a suburb of Washington, D.C., install the software during Integration Week, stay to provide any necessary integration support, and make adjustments to the software if needed, and then return home. Quite simple. I departed from our offices in Los Angeles on a Sunday and arrived at the facility bright and early on Monday morning. They already had an AIX workstation prepared for me, and I had confirmed with the integration manager and the chief system administrator that they had a tape drive and sufficient space on all the drives to install our software and compile it in the environment. I was pleasantly surprised to discover that the system was, indeed, installed, had a functional tape drive, and sufficient disk space for the software. In fact, everything was progressing so smoothly that our program was one of the first of several major software packages to be integrated as part of the proposal to the government client, and I had completed all my work by noon on Tuesday. I spent Tuesday afternoon assisting some of the other teams in testing their software, answering inquiries about our software, and actively monitoring the network using our network management software. There is something genuinely satisfying, to a tech enthusiast like me, that is, about watching individuals unplugging and replugging cables into the back of a network device, watching the port indicator change from off to green or yellow, if there were significant packet loss issues, on the device, and observing the same simulated lights on our management software displays shift from dark gray to green or yellow. In other words, our software was functioning as intended and actively monitoring the network as it was meant to. I called my boss, the primary founder of the company, to share the good news. He informed me that, due to intellectual property concerns and copyright issues, under no circumstances was I to leave the source code on the network. He emphasized that I needed to leave the binaries and configuration files, but I had to eliminate the source code hierarchy. Okay, boss, whatever you say. I informed the integration manager that I was going to remove the source code, and he understood. I inserted a new tape and created a backup of the entire source code hierarchy. After completing the backup, I restored it on another file system and ran a couple of utilities to compare the two build hierarchies, just to ensure the backup functioned correctly. After verifying the integrity of the backup, I then created a second backup of the source hierarchy and performed another comparison, just to be cautious. By early afternoon, I had placed one of the copies in an overnight delivery package and sent it back to the office in Los Angeles, while I kept the other tape with me in case I needed anything for the remainder of the week. I, of course, had my original source code tape, but possessing the backup of the hierarchy after all the compiling and building was far more beneficial if I needed to restore the environment. After confirming with the integration manager and the chief system administrator that it was safe, I then deleted the source hierarchy. I spent the next day and a half assisting wherever I could, and by Friday, the entire system was nearly prepared, with only a few peripheral components still needing to be integrated and configured. There was a final meeting with the integration manager, the system administrator and his team, and all the vendors to review the final items before the presentation for Pi Arus on the following Thursday or Friday. When it was my turn to deliver my final status report, I reiterated, emphasized, and then, for good measure, stated once more clearly that our source code had been removed from the file system, and the only evidence of my presence in the building was the binaries for our software and the related configuration files. I stressed that, due to legal concerns, we could not nor would not be providing our source code in any form, and that they were responsible for backing up the file system that contained the binaries. I was assured, reassured, and then told rather impatiently something along the lines of, "Yeah, we know, we'll be backing up the system as soon as the final integrations are made." I offered to create a backup of the binary hierarchy, but since other vendors had their binaries in the directory, I was unable to do so because of the other vendors' intellectual property. But I was informed again that they would handle backups to ensure everything was secure. After a long, intensive week collaborating with 8-10 different vendors, everyone was exhausted and irritable, but feeling optimistic about the prospect of securing the large government contract. If I recall correctly, the other consortium competing for the contract was actually being led by, you guessed it, IBM. I returned home that Friday and enjoyed a delightful, well-deserved, relaxing weekend with my family. I was quite fatigued from the cross-country flight, and the jet lag was taking a toll on my body. On the following Monday, I arrived at the office and opened my email, and nearly cried. Someone had decided that before constructing the final system intended for the proposal demonstration, they should ensure the machine was in pristine condition, and so it had been wiped. Somehow, the system administrator assigned to make the backup must have misheard the instruction, because you're probably ahead of me here, they had not backed up the system before wiping it, and could we please send a tape with our software so they could recreate it? The company founder said, absolutely not. The only option was to fly out there and reconstruct the software on their system again. And so, after calling my wife to repack my suitcase and bring it to me, that night I boarded a red-eye flight from Los Angeles back to Washington, D.C. Quick side note, I can't sleep on airplanes and was stuck in a window seat in the last row of a section. Due to the emergency exit directly behind me, my seat didn't recline. To make matters even more amusing, the individual in the aisle seat got a drink shortly after takeoff, took 2 sips, and then promptly fell asleep with his half-finished gin and tonic on his tray and his hand holding the glass steady. For the entire flight. The flight was full, and I was unable to get up and move. Thus, for the entire flight, I was unable to sleep, unable to recline my seat, unable to get up to use the restroom, and had to keep an eye on his drink to ensure it didn't spill. I took a shuttle from the airport to the hotel, arriving around 7:00 a.m. I checked in and took a long, hot soak in the tub just to prepare for the day. Around 8:00 a.m., the integration manager met me for breakfast and then took me back to the integration site. I loaded the tape with our source code and executed the make process, which completed in about 10 minutes without any error messages because I knew to check TMP first. After copying the binaries and configuration files to the integration machine and testing it, I looked at the integration manager and said, "If you don't mind, could you please create a backup or two before you take me back to the airport?" After the backups were created and confirmed, I once again removed our source code, and we departed for the airport. We stopped for lunch, and I was back on a plane by mid-afternoon. That flight was also full, and the temperature in the cabin was higher than usual. I believe the combination of stress, flying coast to coast twice within less than 24 hours, the heat and sweat, and consuming several hasty meals wreaked havoc on my body because the next day, I was covered in a rash from head to toe. Thus concludes the tale of the AIX and the miseries associated with that particular chapter of my life. But, Bob Ag, I hear you exclaim, what about the contract with Pi Arus? Why, it was awarded to IBM because of course it was.